Hello everyone, welcome. My name is Joshua Wert. I'm the CEO of the Sabes JCC. I'm happy to welcome everyone here today. 5 years ago, long before I took this job or could ever imagine I'd be working at a Sabes, at a JCC, I saw a 1-hour documentary on the European Jews after the Holocaust who moved to Asia, and my mind was blown. I thought it was so interesting. And so I was delighted to learn that we would be involved in such an awesome project. I think the topic is absolutely fascinating. One thing I love about this job is that when we do programs like this, when we bring the community together, we always try to do it with partners. We don't want to do anything in isolation. We believe that that we are better together. And so I'm very happy and want to acknowledge the many organizations that partnered with the Sabes JCC in this. The Confucius Institute at the University of Minnesota, the Jewish Community Relations Council of Minnesota and the Dakotas, which is referred to as JCRC, the University of Minnesota Center for Jewish Studies, the University of Minnesota Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, and the St. Paul JCC. The St. Paul JCC is, if you don't know, it's right across the river in St. Paul. And we have an exhibit here. They also have an exhibit. We do a lot of that co-exhibition. They're highlighting stories of 4 Shanghailanders with deep Minnesota connections. And so I hope all of you will make your way over there also. With no more further ado, I'd like to welcome to the podium Joan, and I hope I get the last name pronounced correctly, Joan Brzezinski, Executive Director of the China Center and Confucius Institute at the University of Minnesota, and Mr. Steve Hunegs, the Executive Director of JCRC.
Good evening. Welcome, and thank you, Joshua, for always being a wonderful host, and the entire staff of the Minneapolis Sabes Jewish Community Center. And an opportunity to sit for a video for the Sabes, and I call it the crossroads of the community. It really is, so a round of applause for it. It's remarkable to be in the presence of some remarkable people. First, we have Shanghailanders, people who survived the Holocaust because they had good fortune and wherewithal to make it to Shanghai. And Kurt Hort, Ellen Wiss, Manny Gabler, and Helen Vick. So I think we start with a round of applause. And we are in the presence of the Chinese Consul General from Chicago, and we owe him a round of applause. And the University of Minnesota Provost, Karen Hanson. Talk more about the relationship with the university later, but a round of applause for the university because in many ways that wonderful institution is largely, significantly responsible for this evening. And thank you too to the St. Paul JCC and my dear friend, Michael Waldman. In 1936, even 2 years before Kristallnacht, the leading Jewish statesman of his time, perhaps of the entire 20th century, Chaim Weizmann, said this ruefully: "The world is divided into 2 places, places where Jews cannot live and places where Jews could not enter." But over thousands of miles in history, the Chinese in Shanghai opened their doors of survival to the Jews, primarily from Germany and Austria, so that they could have a refuge, so that they could have a sanctuary. And we have wonderful survivors with their precious memories here with us tonight, some of whom will share them shortly in the next program starting at 7 o'clock. And keep this in mind. The Chinese opened the doors of Shanghai despite the terrible suffering, the terrible atrocities committed at the hands of the Japanese, particularly after 19 1937. So with all the difficulties that China, the Chinese nation, and Shanghai were experiencing, they helped facilitate it, made it possible for some 18, 20, 22,000, whatever the number may be, of Jews to survive the Holocaust. Take time later to go through the exhibit if you haven't, and meet our Shanghailanders and tour the exhibit. And now it's my great honor to call to the podium Joan, Brzezinski, the Executive Director of the Confucius Institute, a wonderful partner, and who brought this possibility to the JCRC and to the community. And thank you, Joan, for all. A little bit later after our speakers, we'll have a chance to say some other goodbyes, and thank you. So stick around after our speakers too. But Joan, how wonderful it is that you're here with us.
Good afternoon. I'm very pleased to be here, and on behalf of the Confucius Institute, I'd like to give a very heartfelt thank you to the Jewish Community Relations Center in Minnesota and Dakotas. Steve Hunegs and his colleagues have provided this wonderful home for this exhibit, and they have been stalwart partners in collecting our data and helping us put this together. So thank you very much, Steve. It is my great pleasure right now to introduce today's guest speakers. Our first speaker we're honored to welcome is Consul General Zhao Weiping, the Consulate General of the People's Republic of China in Chicago. Consul General Zhao began his post in 2013, and he's been a tremendous supporter of the University of Minnesota and our programs here in Minnesota. He has an outstanding foreign service career that spans more than 25 years. Please welcome Consul General Zhao.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you, Steve. Good evening. It is my great pleasure to join you this evening for the grand opening of the exhibit, Jewish Refugees in Shanghai. First, I wish to express my appreciation to the Confucius Institute at the University of Minnesota and the Jewish Community Relations Council of Minnesota and the Dakotas for organizing this event. I would also like to extend my sincere greetings and best wishes to the Jewish community in Minnesota and all the guests present here. I have attended exhibits on Jewish refugees in Shanghai on several occasions before. Each time I was saddened by the tragic experiences of the Jewish people caused by the Nazi persecution, and deeply touched by their courage, determination, perseverance in pursuit of freedom and survival. It was with such an indomitable spirit that the Jewish refugees had overcome all the difficulties in Shanghai, their new home, and rekindled their hope for a new life. They started business and families there, and new babies were born. I'm delighted that several representatives of them are with us today. I have great respect for them. Their presence makes our gathering today special. Recalling that part of history, I feel proud that China provided a refuge for the Jewish people who fled the atrocities of the Nazis. The Chinese people also endured immeasurable sufferings at that time, and they understood the pains of the Jewish refugees. There were moving stories about the friendship between the local Shanghainese and the Jewish refugees, from which we can feel the beauty and warmth of humanity even in the darkness of those traumatic years. This exhibit was held at a special time as the world is celebrating the 70th anniversary of the victory of the anti-fascist war. which will for sure help us revisit the lessons of the past and reflect on the importance of maintaining the lasting peace of war. Thank you.
No Jewish/Chinese event is end without the gift to you, Captain General. And so I have from Minnesota a great work of wonderful Minnesota writer F. Scott Fitzgerald from St. Paul, great chroniclers of the 1920s and 1930s, as a gift, first edition, British, of some of the short stories. Thank you.
Our next speaker, Judge Tony Leung, is the United States Magistrate Judge for the District of Minnesota. He's also the first Asian Pacific American to serve on the federal bench in the state. Judge Leung was the first Asian American judge in Minnesota when he was appointed to the State District Court Judge in Minnesota's 4th District in 1994 by Governor Arnie Carlson. He's held district court position for the next 17 years until this federal appointment. Judge Joan is a fellow of the American Bar Foundation and is a founding member of the National Association of Pacific American Bar Association Minnesota chapter. Please welcome Judge Joan.
Well, first of all, what a great honor it is to have an opportunity to participate and to observe this wonderful exhibition. So I want to start by thanking some of the people who have really been instrumental in getting this program to Minnesota. Of course, as Steve Hunegs has already mentioned, the University of Minnesota, its integral part, the Jewish Community Relations Council of Minnesota and the Dakotas, and the JCC of St. Paul, and so many other organizations that have seen in advance the importance of having a program such as this. I also want to thank so many members of the Chinese community here in Minnesota who have been so supportive in getting the word out about this wonderful program. And those include people with the USCPFA, the United States Chinese Friendship Association folks, the Chinese Heritage Foundation, and so many other organizations that have helped get the word out. And I hope that we will continue to get the word out as this program is here in Minnesota. Now, I want to recognize and just thank Consul General Zhao for taking time out of his very busy schedule. He flew in, and he is a person who has an extremely busy schedule, flying not only, of course, within the United States, but also returning home from time to time. So I just want to thank you so much for being here. I want to give you a special round of applause. And so, on behalf of the Chinese community, 我们希望你有很多机会回来。I also want to make a special recognition of a good friend of mine, longtime friend of mine, who is the Norwegian Honorary Consul General in Minnesota, Gary Gandrud, right back there. Thank you, Gary, for being here as well. And it is interesting how small the world is, because my first connections with the Jewish Community Relations Council goes back to the 1990s, at a time when we were trying to address some issues in the Chinese community. And it was Gary Gandrud who made the initial introductions to various law enforcement officers, and also then by a long process, we actually got to know the Jewish Community Relations Council. And since that time, since the 90s, the Chinese community has worked with the JCRC on a number of projects. One of the first projects I recall was in the 1990s. There was hate crimes in Minnesota, but there was no legislation behind it. The JCRC led the way, and back then it was the OCA, a very small organization, the Organization of Chinese Americans in Minnesota, joined together and collaborated with many other groups to get through the hate crimes legislation. I, as a judge, am not going to comment on the legislative part of it, but merely I noted to say that the importance in the long-term ties between the Chinese and Jewish communities, not only in Minnesota, but of course, as we see in this program, in Shanghai. And the events in Shanghai of so many years ago, I think are very important for all of us to remember, not only in the tragedies and the inhumanity that surrounded both of those cultures at that time, but what is most important about this celebration is the people who have survived, the people who welcomed people who were not welcome anywhere else. The message that we have here today is a message of common humanity and decency. And that's the message I hope all of us will go and tell our friends about, and tell them, come over to the Sabes Community Center and see this wonderful program, because it is a celebration of the common decency and common humanity of two great cultures. Thank you.
Is Hanson, the Senior Vice President of Academic Affairs and Provost for the University of Minnesota. She is the Chief Academic Officer. She's responsible for leading the academic mission of the university, including its implementation of the university's strategic plan. We are proud to recognize her as our alumni, and we would like to welcome her now for remarks. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Joan, and good evening, everyone. I am really delighted to be able to join you tonight as we celebrate the grand opening of this distinctive and historically important exhibit. On behalf of the University of Minnesota, I want to thank the Sabes Jewish Community Center for hosting this wonderful exhibit, and thanks from the University of Minnesota as well, the Consul General, Zhao Weiping, and Judge Tony Leung, who were inspiring and moving remarks. We want to thank all of you for taking time out of your hectic schedules to participate in this wonderful event. The amount of time and thought and effort that goes into a project of this scope and quality is enormous. And the project involves a wide array of contributing organizations. I want to take a moment to recognize University of Minnesota entities, my colleagues, who played a role in the exhibit's creation. As people have said, the Confucius Institute has been a key partner in organizing both the exhibit and tonight's grand opening. In addition, the Center for Jewish Studies and the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies have played important roles. Thank you to all the faculty, staff, and students in those offices who contributed time, talent, and dedication. But what's been crucial to bringing the project to fruition is, as I indicated, a partnership. The Jewish Community Relations Council of Minnesota and the Dakotas, the Sabes Jewish Community Center, the Jewish Community Center of Greater St. Paul and the Dakotas, working together and with the university have made all this possible. The collaboration of all of our organizations and institutions has meant that we all have an opportunity to engage a wider audience in learning about historical events that still resonate today. There are so many touching and inspiring stories told through this exhibit. It spotlights the unique experiences of those who lived this history, as well as those who have heard the tales passed down through their families, several of whom, as of course you know, have Minnesota connections. This exhibit helps us remember what we should never forget. We're grateful to have had this opportunity to collaborate. Public engagement is at the core of the mission of the University of Minnesota, and this project is a superb example of what we can accomplish when we come together as a community. Before I conclude, I'd like to invite you to attend something else, a lecture on April 3rd at 5 p.m. at the University of Minnesota on the subject of Jews in modern China. Professor Xu Xing, the Glaser Professor and Chair of Jewish and Israel Studies at Nanjing University in China, will be the speaker. Professor Xu Xing is both an historian and a translator, and he's introduced modern Hebrew literature to Chinese readers. His lecture will focus on the Jewish community in modern China from the 1840s to the present. There's a link in your program to the website if you'd like more information, or just call my office. Again, I want to say how delighted I am to be here, to thank everyone else for being here, and I just want to say enjoy this wonderful exhibit.
I was witness an hour ago, 90 minutes ago, to a very special and poignant moment. Kurt Hort, who is here, was introduced to the Chinese Consul General, and he looked at the Consul General in his eyes, and he said, "Shanghai saved my life." So if there's a thesis statement or a headline or one sentence that sums this up, it's precisely that. So thank you, Kurt, for encapsulating the exhibit, the experience, the partnership, the collaboration amongst the Chinese and the Jews perfectly. I have a lot of thank yous that are so very important. And if Joan, Emily Hanson, and Pashua Bang could come up here for a minute, I'd like to present some gifts to our dear partners at the Confucius Institute. JCRC staff, which does such remarkable things to make this happen, and Susie Greenberg, Laura Zell, and Anthony Sussman really led the way, so a lot of applause for the JCRC staff. Ruth Solom is here, I know, from our staff, also, and Jason Rose also helping out tonight, so thank you very much. From the Sabes JCC staff, Robin Aywand and Sonny Kahn. So Sonny and Robin, thank you very much. I know Catherine Tain from the St. Paul JCC was very important too in helping make this evening happen. As I mentioned before, Kurt Hort, Manny Gabler, Ellen Wiss, Helen Bix, our precious survivors. We've talked about the survivors, of course. There was Shanghai civilization interacting in close proximity to these thousands of Jews who had made their way to Shanghai, and as good fortune would have it, at least two Shanghailanders, people from Shanghai, Chinese from Shanghai, live in our community, one of whom is here tonight, Ms. Ming Zhao, who's also the founder of the Chinese Heritage Foundation, is here. Ms. Zhao, can you stand up for us? And then Doug Liu. Doug, I don't believe is with us tonight, but if you look at page 12 of the program, you'll read all about Doug. I want to recognize and thank, at the University of Minnesota, the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, Alejandro Baer, University of Minnesota's Center for Jewish Studies, Ravel and Prell, Gary Gandrud, who Judge Leung pointed out before. Thank you, Gary, for coming, a dear friend, and he and I are both big hockey fans, so go Gophers for tomorrow night. Okay. Dan Wilderson, as our dear friend from St. Cloud State University and the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Education, who took time to be with us tonight. Greg Hugh, the editor of the China Insight newspaper, has given us such wonderful coverage, so thank you. A special round of applause for Greg. And then I understand I was introduced to Steve Field, who's originally from Minnesota, now lives in Shanghai and just happens to be in town. And Steve is with us tonight, so what a wonderful introduction that is. And I understand he knows a lot about Shanghai and the story already, so thank you, Steve, for being here tonight. And then we also have a special delegation from the Minneapolis Jewish Federation from Rehovot, Israel, fresh off the Israeli elections, who are here with us tonight. So how wonderful it is to greet our friends from Rehovot. With that, I'll commend the exhibit to you, the food that is available tonight, as well as our panel discussion with survivors afterwards, starting at 7 o'clock. Most of all, thank you all for coming tonight. It's deeply appreciated. We have many members of our JCRC board that are here, many members, former JCRC presidents, current President Jody Upin, and they all say thank you to all of you in this wonderful partnership that makes tonight's event and exhibit possible. Thank you, and have a good evening. We'll see you.